WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. Today on the program, why a local think tank is concerned about Detroiters losing potential wealth due to homes not being passed down properly to their family heirs.
But first, on the Metro, our climate is changing fast. Just look around. This is one of the warmest winters on record, and that's come with more extreme weather. The past few summers, we've seen very heavy rains, which have brought up a lot of damaging floods. That's partly because of our infrastructure. It's not ready for these events. Recently, the city of Detroit ramped up its flooding prevention programs. To discuss these programs and what the city is doing to get ahead of chaotic storms, we have District 4 Detroit City Councilwoman Latisha Johnson here. Councilwoman Johnson, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's just start right out with the Basement Backup Protection Program. It recently expanded, so what is this program for those who don't know, and how has it expanded?
The Basement Backup Protection Program is designed to help remove sewer water, or rainwater, I should say, from the city system. And so the Basement Backup Protection Program provides for a number of different things to take place at individuals' residential property. So it would be disconnecting downspouts so that water is running onto grass or soil, a flower bed, things of that nature, or into a rain barrel. Also making sure that residents have access to either a sump pump or a backflow preventer that would keep water or sewage from coming into the property. And now the program has also expanded to include lateral sewer line replacements. So if someone's sewer line is not completely connected to the city's main line to get all of their wastewater into the larger system, then we are actually digging up basements, or digging up backyards, I should say, and removing the old cracked up pipe, the disconnected pipe, and putting in an altogether new plumbing system for their wastewater to go into the city's main line. In addition to that function, we have also added in the city of Detroit additional neighborhoods that can now apply for the Basement Backup Protection Program.
And when I was reading along, there's 11 altogether. I'm not going to have you go through all of them right now, but I know that there are quite a few. You represent actually one of the ones that's one of the harder hit ones, is that Jefferson Chalmers area, the Venice of Detroit. So talk about some of the unique challenges that you all have right now in Jefferson Chalmers and how this is such a huge deal for you.
Sure. So the greatest unique challenge with the Jefferson Chalmers community is that the neighborhood was developed in a way that it sits beneath the wastewater treatment line, the main line. So any of their wastewater has to be pumped up into the system in order for it to be sent to the wastewater treatment facility and to have it treated. And so that causes a problem when we have inclement weather. We have a lot of rainwater that's in the system, and the system is already overwhelmed. So it's difficult to pump their wastewater into the system, and then it causes for the wastewater to come up in people's basements. Yeah. And so one of the other unique challenges in the city of Detroit is the age of our properties. Director Gary Brown with the Detroit Water and Sewers Department has indicated that there are roughly 32,000 households in the city altogether whose wastewater treatment line, their sewer line, is disconnected from the city's main line.
Whoa. Yeah, I'm just going through my brain right now because I know so many old homes. I know so many people who are living in old homes right now throughout the city of Detroit who definitely have that issue where they just are not connected to the main system. So speaking of sewer lines, the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department is cleaning its sewer lines, is attempting to clean 500 to 600 miles of these lines. And why is it so important, of course, to keep these lines clean to prevent flooding?
Absolutely. It's extremely important because it helps us to have greater capacity in the lines. So as we keep the lines open, when we have heavy rainfalls, then the system within itself can accommodate the rainwater, as well as all of our wastewater coming from our homes. So it's extremely important to keep the catch basins clean. I think residents should be made aware of that. One of the other challenges that we used to have in the city of Detroit, people were actually encouraged to dispose of grease, cooking grease, down the street basin, and that within itself has clogged up a lot of the lines. And so the Detroit Water and Sewage Department has been going throughout the city trying to vacuum out those lines to keep those lines clean and open. And sometimes it creates a challenge because construction companies may have dumped concrete materials down those lines. And so we have to be very mindful of doing that and how detrimental it can be to the entire system.
That is so, once again, interesting, because I know of a neighbor who also had the same thing happen. They bought a home and found out that it was filled with concrete. So they're still working to get that process finished and fixed up. But also, speaking of the department itself, it's working to improve highways and working to divert stormwater directly to the Detroit River and away from those city sewers. So how long will this particular project take to get that water away from the highways, and why is it so important?
So that is a project that has not yet been implemented, at least on the far east side.
Okay.
MDOT is looking to come in and provide some relief for us on the east side as we look to expand I-94. There has been a lot of work that's taken place in District 7 near the Rouge River as well, because that's an area in the city that floods a lot, as well as District 4. And so we are currently working on a complete streets / green streets ordinance that will help us to identify ways and areas in the city where we can institute permeable pavement so that we're soaking up the rainwater as opposed to it going into the entire system, and hopefully to help to alleviate the system.
That's perfect segue, because that was one of my questions to you, was about the infrastructure that we have right now. It's a little bit more concrete, gray, and we want to try to build a more green space or green infrastructure. So what are some other ways that you all are looking to do that, other than like retention basins and using and making sure the water is being diverted to, I believe they're called like water beds or water...
Rain gardens, bioswales, all of that. And so as a part of our ordinance, what we're looking to do is anytime there's major road construction, we're identifying ways, whether it's permeable pavement, whether we do a curb cut into a berm where we have a bioswale or a rain garden, and we can direct the road so that the water is going into the bioswale or the rain garden on a street, as opposed to it going down the catch basin and into the entire system. So we're doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that we minimize the amount of rainfall that goes into the system and redirecting it.
And, just a random question, but do you believe that, or do you see that the more people that are coming into the city, living into the neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods that may have not been as populated as they once were, we're seeing a lot of development. Do you also see that being an issue and putting extra stress onto the system? It
is certainly a concern, but there have been ordinances that were previously passed that require for new development to identify ways to redirect stormwater and to manage it better, as opposed to it going into the system, creating more of a challenge for the system itself.
And I think about just back in years past, I believe it might have been 2014, 2015, we had the giant flood that happened. I remember Southfield Freeway was completely underwater, and we continue to see that in certain spaces, in certain places. We saw it on 94, I believe, during the pandemic or just around that time. How far away are we from that again? Are we seeing improvements enough that we're not going to see something like that? Or, where are we at in terms of flood mitigation and prevention?
So I think we're doing a lot to address that, to prevent that from happening, especially at the scale that we saw it. So in particular, in the Jefferson Chalmers community, the Detroit Water and Sewage Department has received an $11.3 million grant. It's a BRIC grant. It's for resiliency, and we're utilizing those dollars to go underground and expand the pipes in that Jefferson Chalmers community so that we're building capacity. One of the greatest challenges is actually to separate the system. So we have a combined sewer system. So all of our wastewater, rainwater, gray water, all goes into the same system. And it's very difficult to dig everything up and separate it so that we can send gray water and rainwater directly to the water after it's been filtered or treated. But we do have some projects coming online downtown in the near future that are doing that because they are so close to the river that they can filter the rainwater and gray water and have it go directly to the Detroit River.
So much to unpack, so many different things to get into. But I just think about just the last thing is, what can we do as residents, as people who are visitors to the city, whatever it may be? You live here, you play here, you work here, whatever it may be. What are ways that we can help mitigate or help prevent some of this severe flooding that we're seeing?
So 3 things I would encourage our residents to do if you have a catch basin near your home to help to keep it clean, but everyone can avoid throwing trash on the ground that may clog it, right? So that we're not just looking to our neighbor who lives close to it to keep it clean, but certainly we need that to stay clean and open. Everyone in the city of Detroit and in the state should really remove their downspouts from going into the ground and redirecting it so that the water goes onto grass or flower garden, flower bed. And then lastly, just making sure that we are disposing of cooking grease properly and it does not go down the street basin.
Yes. Okay. I think those are 3 things that we can all remember and make sure that we try not to do. District 4 Detroit City Councilwoman Latisha Johnson, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin here with Tia Graham, and coming up, we'll talk about why a local think tank is concerned about thousands of homes not being properly passed down to family heirs on the Metro. It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin alongside Tia Graham. Got a lot to get to today on the show, but first, the news you need to know. Naomi Barber King, a civil rights activist married to Martin Luther King Jr.'s younger brother, died on Thursday in Atlanta. She was 92 years old. Naomi King established the A.D. King Foundation in 2008 with the mission of empowering young people and women to make social change in their communities. So we do send out our condolences to the family there. Also want to remind you that Americans may wake up a little groggier on Sunday. And that's because daylight savings time is happening this weekend, and we'll be losing an hour of sleep as our clocks shift forwards. Make sure that you shift your clock forward. The only thing I want you losing is sleep, not your job, if you're showing up to work an hour late. Can't say there's an excuse now because we let you know. But we want to get into some of the things happening here in Detroit that you need to know about as well. And to start this conversation, I'd like you to just imagine owning a home that has been in your family for generations, a cornerstone of your heritage and a symbol of your legacy, only to find out that legally it's not yours. In Detroit, this scenario is not a mere hypothetical for thousands, and that's because of the pervasive yet often overlooked issue of heirs property, where homes are passed down without a will. It's an issue that has led to tangled titles and unclear ownership for more than you might realize in the city. However, a new report by Detroit Future City shines a light on the situation, which they observe not only threatens the stability of families, but also hampers these families' ability to build generational wealth, particularly in communities of color. With over 5,500 residential properties affected, valued at more $260 $268 million. The implications for Detroit are profound and far-reaching. That's why we want to dive into this issue and its implications, including what's behind the numbers, what we might be able to do to reverse it. And to do that, we're joined by two great guests. Starting off, I've got Anika Goss, the Chief Executive Officer of Detroit Future City, the think tank behind this report. Anika, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Also, to give us a little bit of that legal muscle on this issue, we've got Kenneth Silver, an attorney and shareholder at Hertz Schramm Law Firm. Ken, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll start off with you, Anika, as you join us here in studio. What was Detroit Future City so interested in with this issue, and can you let us know why it's significant in your words?
Well, the study was actually commissioned by the Gilbert Family Foundation, so they were the ones that really sponsored the project, and part of this was their effort for tax foreclosure prevention. For us, this issue really is at the center of part of what Detroit Future City is really focused on, which is securing neighborhoods and increasing wealth for families in Detroit.
Yeah.
And when you think about thriving middle-class neighborhoods that Detroiters want to live in, home ownership is a major part of that. And, this is an issue that's happening around the country. I think we initially thought that this would be a very small issue or something that we're just not really focused on in Detroit. But it turns out it's a really significant issue. And the 5,500 properties that were discovered is just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, let's get in what's specifically happening here, because we've talked around it a little bit. It can have some legal, technical issues. So before we bring into specifically what's going on in probate, I just want you to let us know what's the scope of this problem and why it's happening. What are the specifics?
Right. So part of what we learned in this process is we went through the Register of Deeds and worked really closely with the Wayne County Treasurer's Office and the Assessor's Office at the City of Detroit. And they were all wonderful partners of this, opening up all of these records. And to understand if you are in fact think you own a home because that home was left to you by a parent or a grandparent, but your name is not on the deed or the title, then you actually don't own that home, even if the intention was that you would own that home, even if you've been paying the taxes, even if you've been living there a really long time and taking care of that home. And the impact of that, of these 5,500 properties, I think people will often think of these homes as very low income, almost land bank homes, but it's not. It's happening. Actually, the census tract that we saw, or the neighborhood that we saw with the highest number of these properties, where the properties were valued on the east side, on the lower east side, at almost $182,000 for the average home price. Yeah. So those are pretty expensive homes. These are not the $30,000 homes that we think of at Detroit.
Well, Anika, I want to get in with you a little bit more about wealth generation in this issue. But before we do that, I want to look at the legal mechanisms here, because my instinct would be no one wants a tangled up title on a home, right? So we have this probate system that you would think would be a fail-safe for it. But is this what I'm hearing right, Ken? Is there a potential that an heir living in what you might call heirs property that didn't go through probate, they're at risk of losing this inheritance? And if so, how does that work?
Well, I wouldn't suggest that they're at risk of losing their inheritance.
Okay.
Rather, the issue is they won't receive it until they jump through the proper hoops in order to transfer title. I suppose to get really deep in the weeds, the definition of probate means, it's an old English word, it means to transfer title.
This is good to know.
There are things that need to be done in order to make sure that that happens, no different than when you transfer title to a car. You need to fill out that title form and register it with the Secretary of State. When you transfer a home, you need to record a deed with the Register of Deeds in order to effectuate that transfer. But after somebody dies, a dead person can't sign a deed. And their next of kin can't sign a deed. Only one with official authority granted to them by a probate court can sign a deed. And unfortunately, many people aren't aware of that system and don't realize that they haven't done what they need to do in order to transfer title until they try to sell their home. And then suddenly they find out title isn't in their name, they can't transfer it, and poof, it's time for the lawyers to get involved and fix all of that. And the longer people wait, the more difficult and expensive it becomes.
Right. And and that's kind of the barrier of entry here, right? Because if you think that you have it, but you don't because you're not even aware of that process, maybe that's where it gets more expensive later on than dealing with it earlier. So Ken, what recommendations would you have for people out there who think they might be in this scenario to prevent it from happening to them, or recommendations to give family members who might be in that situation?
Well, the best thing, of course, to do is to engage in advanced estate planning. Simple estate planning can be something like transferring property now as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If a parent transfers a property as joint tenant with right of survivorship to a child, upon death of the parent, the property automatically is owned by the child. There are other estate planning vehicles that people can engage in, but the simplest thing to do is advanced planning and joint deeds. That's the quickest and easiest. And then post-mortem, the simplest thing to do is to proceed through probate promptly. There is an associated cost because most people have difficulty doing it on their own. The Wayne County probate system is not the most user-friendly, although they try, and I give them credit for trying. And I get calls on this stuff daily.
Well, Ken, I appreciate that. Anika, you've spoken to the people. Of course, you guys also had some focus groups on there. What recommendations would you have? What did you learn in going through this process?
Well, only 28% of Black people actually have a will. And this is a really tough conversation to have, right? Like, nobody wants to think about their parent or their grandparent dying. And so, and we also, and this is what we learned in the focus group, that I think we as Black people, this has become an issue primarily in the Black community. You see more of this in two primary areas, maybe three. You see this in Black communities, whether it's urban or rural. You see it in rural communities over farmland, and you see it in Native American tribal land. And so what we're dealing with here, it's mostly that Black people don't believe that their assets, a home, is worth enough of having a will. They don't feel like it's worth even taking the time or the expense to do that. And this is the source of wealth for a lot of families, actually having that home, whether it's a home that you can sell or whether it's a home that you can pass on to your family for other people to live in.
Yeah, it's very important. I'm glad you brought this up. But then again, you've spoken to folks here. We put a pin on, or we put a figure on what the wealth generation issues can be here. Let's talk about solutions, policy-oriented solutions. Based on what you've seen, Anika, what do you think we can do to help this? Because again, nobody benefits from having all of this tangled title ownership at all.
Well, so we're having a webinar on this on March 13th, next Wednesday, and I would encourage people to attend, and you can get more information on that on our website at DetroitFutureCity.com. But as part of the release of this report, we also issued a really simple toolkit. Here are the first things that you can do if you think you do not own your home. And contacting either Michigan Legal Services, or if you can afford an attorney, then you need to do that right away. As the attorney said on the call, that this is an issue, you can't wait for this. And the longer you wait, especially if there are other heirs, all of those, it's called tenancy in common.
Right.
And everyone who is a descendant of whoever owned that home has a right to that property.
Right.
It could be sold out from under you. So one of the main things that we want people to do is to not be afraid of estate planning. And there are other cities that have done this really, really well, that have created coalitions, which is what we're hoping to do in Detroit, so that entering the system for estate planning, for probate, if you have to go to probate and if you have to go to court over this, for developing a will, for transference of deeds, all of those in other cities, they've created a coalition to make it much, much easier.
Yeah.
And not just for low-income families, but for these middle-class families that also have these properties. Even if you have the money for an attorney, you need to understand the system.
Right. No, that's very important. Again, if you have one of these homes, it's probably worth it, from what I'm hearing, to take a look at that and make sure it goes through the proper channels. Before we get out of here, Ken, I just want to give you an opportunity, because you mentioned how Wayne County tries. You're in there, you do the probate law. Any recommendations you would have for policymakers or lawmakers listening right now on how to make that process a little bit easier for folks who might be in this scenario?
The solution to most problems is education. People understand what they're dealing with. It's an easy fix. One point I really want to make as a follow-up to your other guest's comment is, even if somebody has a will, that doesn't avoid probate. You still need to go through that process. And a family's home is the centerpiece of a family's wealth, as already stated, and to protect that wealth, it's worth finding out how to do it in a simple, straightforward fashion. There are lots of attorneys at reasonable fees that can help. Legal aid can help. Going to the Wayne County website can help, because the forms are available. People can do this on their own.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're going to have to end it there, but Ken Silver, attorney and shareholder at Hertz Schramm Law Firm, and Anika Goss, CEO of Detroit Future City, thank you so much for joining us and helping shed some light on this complex issue.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
This is The Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. It's a Friday, March 8th. Taking a look at the weather forecast for today. Expect a high around 54 degrees. There is a chance of rain after 4 p.m., and that rain will continue into the night. Winds up to 24 miles per hour tomorrow. Saturday, not Sunday, Saturday, the rain will continue. Temperatures are going to drop to around 44 degrees by 5 p.m. And Sunday, bring your winter coat back out, or possibly see some snow showers out there, with temperatures around 39 degrees and wind gusts up to 30 miles per hour. So Sunday, put on a coat. And speaking of cold weather, I think about football season. The Detroit Lions had one of their best seasons ever this year, and it was hard not to take notice. Even before the 2023 season began, people came out for the Lions. They were energized by Coach Dan Campbell's vigor, and they were enthused about the young lineup. And they wore Detroit Lions swag like many have never seen before, Nick.
That's right. So after making the NFC Championship last year, what do we need to do even better? What are the Lions trying to do? To talk about this, we have Jeremy Reisman, Lions beat writer for Pride of Detroit, the SB Nation blog site for Detroit Lions fans. Jeremy, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Jeremy. So coming off of a big season, everyone's super thrilled and excited here in Detroit. We want to know, how are people feeling elsewhere?
I mean, man, I think people are just really excited about the offseason. This is usually the moment where I think Lions fans are always excited. The offseason has been the particular optimistic season for Lions fans, but now it's kind of a rare situation where coming off of one of their best seasons ever, and the Lions are in a really good place with their salary cap. They've got a good amount of draft capital, so I think people are really excited about the upcoming weeks here as they continue to add to their roster.
Yeah, and speaking of adding to the roster, Jeremy, free agency's coming up. Of course, we just had the draft combine. What are some of the positions the Lions are looking at that we need to fill?
Yeah, I think cornerback is definitely going to be kind of the focus here right away. The Lions had definitely a lot of issues covering receivers last year. Their pass defense was one of the worst in the league. And so, even early rumors coming out of the NFL Combine, heading into free agency, it sounds like the Lions are going to try to be very, very active, whether it is trading for one of the top guys that's out there, signing a free agent, or taking care of some of their own inside the building. But cornerback, I think, would be the number one need. And then somewhere on the defensive line, I expect them to add one or two players, even before the draft comes, because, again, that kind of plays into some of their pass defense issues. They weren't getting to the quarterback regularly. And so I expect them to be fairly active in this free agency period, which is a little bit different than the approach they've taken in the past.
Yeah, you've seen them associated with some big names here, Jeremy, but that's one of the things you just brought up, having a cornerback to cover a receiver versus trying to make the quarterback, the opposing quarterback, have less time by getting a pass rush. Is this something where you focus on one versus the other? If you get the defensive tackle, defensive line, you don't need that cornerback? Or is this a yes-and situation? Both will be key for the Lions.
I think it's definitely a yes-and situation here, where they're going to try to improve wherever they can with however many assets they can use at both those positions. I mean, like I said, they're in a healthy situation with their salary cap. They've got good draft capital. I think they're going to try to attack both pretty aggressively, and part of that is because they're so well-rounded everywhere else. They have some issues on the offensive line left to take care of, but receiver group is good, quarterback is good, running back is good, linebacker core is really good. So I think they can really devote a lot of the resources to those two biggest needs.
And, Jeremy, once again, thanks for joining the show this morning. I keep saying afternoon, but players have been raving about Coach Dan Campbell and General Manager Brad Holmes. They've bought into the culture. The culture is positive. It's building in the city of Detroit. You can see it. You can feel it. Why do you think the players love them so much? And what are these guys doing to shape that culture in such a positive way?
Yeah, no, I think Dan Campbell is one of the most remarkable coaches I've really ever encountered. And part of it is just his authenticity. That's the thing that really always pops off the page for me, is that he is unapologetically himself at every single moment you talk to him. And that is kind of rare. It's not only rare amongst coaches, but I think it's rare amongst overall people for them to just be themselves. It sounds like such a simple concept, but also, having him be a former player, I think he understands the struggles of a full season, the physicality of it, that it takes a toll, both mentally and physically, really. And so that sort of just understanding of how it works, and him being the same person every day, where he does care for the players, he does care about the overall health for the team. And you see it with the players that are here. You see it with the players that have left and gone elsewhere and experienced something different. They all tend to say, like, Dan Campbell is a rare breed here. And it's really interesting to see, because it feels like now you're starting to see some of the other teams go in this direction of hiring former players as coaches, whether it's positional coaches, head coaches. The Lions kind of seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve there, because it's obviously not just Dan Campbell on the staff that's a former player, but you look pretty much everywhere else, almost at every other position on the coaching staff has a former player in it. And it's really helped the team.
Jeremy, you're dashing my dreams of joining the Lions coaching staff or front office, but I guess, hey, if it works for the team, I'll take it. And when I think about this team, though, I think one of the reasons they also appreciate him is that aggressiveness that you see from Dan Campbell, him believing in the players, going on fourth down a lot. In fact, to the extent that he said at a press conference, if you're nervous about it, to fans out there, wear a diaper. I never took Dan Campbell up on that, but I think some would say maybe some of that aggression came back to bite him in the championship game, going for it on fourth down, not quite getting it, and also people starting to not be caught off guard with the Lions being so aggressive. So, Jeremy, from your perspective and what you're hearing, is next season, as we're trying to get back to the Super Bowl, a time to maybe ramp back down some of that aggression, or is that part and parcel with Campbell? What are you hearing? What do you think they need to do?
Yeah, no, I don't think he's going to change, quite honestly, because this was a question I had early in his career here, because early on he was obviously very aggressive as well, and you thought maybe he was just doing that because the Lions were overmatched. They needed to kind of come up with these plays on fourth down because they knew if they gave the ball back, they were going to be in trouble. But now they're a competitor. They're a Super Bowl contender, and we saw last year he didn't really slow down at all. I think that's who he is. I think it also plays to the Lions' strengths, right? Their offense has been much better than their defense, so they want to put the ball in the offense's hands rather than put it in the defense's hands. And so, and if you look at some of the analytics, if you're a fan of the analytical community, they're all behind what Dan Campbell is doing. And so I don't think he's going to slow down. I don't think anyone in that building wants him to slow down. It's just in the particular, when it came to the NFC Championship game against the 49ers, they didn't make the plays that they needed to in those big moments. But if they do make those plays in those big moments, then suddenly he's a genius. So I think sometimes you have to focus maybe more so on the process than the result. And it really makes sense to me why Dan Campbell was so aggressive in terms of just his decision making. It's just a matter of it not working out in kind of one of the biggest stages of this franchise's recent career.
Hey, Jeremy, this is the last question to you before we let you go, because we got to let you go, but we could talk Lions all morning.
They definitely do it. Don't try me.
I know Nick could definitely do that. I just want to know a little bit about, like what you're looking forward to most, especially going up into the next season. Do we see a possible run again to the Super Bowl? And as well, what are you thinking about the culture and in terms of a possible dynasty for the Lions?
Oh man, it's a little early to talk dynasty talk, but it at the same time it certainly feels
not to Nick.
But with the age that the team is, I think they finished with the 5th youngest team by snaps. You consider that the people in charge have really only put this team in an upward trajectory since they've landed here. It is starting to think like, by at least Lions standards, if you want to call a Lions dynasty just being a team that makes the playoffs, 5 out of 6 years, which we haven't seen in a very long time, if ever. I think that's something that's very much in the cards. And I don't know, this upcoming season will be like no other because they truly have Super Bowl aspirations. And I think the national media is going to believe that as well. And you mix in the NFL draft in Detroit in over a month here. It's going to be a pretty special year for Detroit Lions fans, and they're coming off a pretty special one too. So it almost feels like we're a little bit spoiled here right now.
Jeremy Reisman, Lions beat writer for Pride of Detroit. Jeremy, thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Hey, it was a pleasure to be here.
The Metro, your daily source for news, arts, and culture that's moving our region and Metro Detroit. Coming up, we'll talk about which Detroit restaurant won the Detroit Free Press Restaurant of the Year. I am hungry, Nick. I don't know if you are.
I'll make it.
Okay, all right. This is the Metro. Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. And coming up a little later on the show, we'll talk to a veterinarian who will give us a lowdown on what's going on with Black representation within the field. And I'm thinking about food, Nick. Fish are friends, not food.
Yeah, well, this is probably not going to help you out what we're getting into next, because we've been covering the food scene a lot here on the Metro this week, and that's because it's a special time to honor that piece of local culture or just make Tia's time finishing out the show that much more difficult.
So hard.
Hearing about food while hungry. But that's all right. A little bit more for you, Tia, because WDET's Ann DeLisi sat down recently with Free Press restaurant and dining critic Lindsay Green to discuss who the media outlet nominated for Restaurant of the Year.
So here we are, Lindsay, talking about Restaurant of the Year yet again. And just like we said yesterday, you had to eat at an awful lot of places to get to this decision. I'm sure this is the hardest decision you have to make. But what came in at number 1 is the best new restaurant for you for 2023?
So at number 1, our Restaurant of the Year, we have Alpino. And I have to say, it wasn't that hard. Alpino has done some really, really amazing things. They really surprised me this past year. So it wasn't too hard to say that this was the big one.
This is great. So There's a little backstory here. So we should mention that this is the old Lady of the House space, which was St. Cece's before that. And it sat empty for a little while, which was kind of heartbreaking. And then the folks at Alpino brought this place back to life with some renovations, and then brought a whole new menu to that space.
So for anybody who's not familiar, the cuisine at Alpino is based on food from the Alps, Alpine cuisine. And I think initially people sort of looked at it like, what does that mean? I think, again, having that familiarity with St. Cece's and also knowing what Kate did at Lady of the House, they had maybe sort of an expectation of what might be next. And so there, we were a little puzzled. But I think what Alpino does really well is that they take a cuisine that might feel foreign and they kind of familiarize it. So you'll see that, I think, and you'll read this in the story, but I think for me, the biggest standout is that there are actually a lot of similarities to our cuisine here in Michigan. I think that we're kind of able to realize that the Great Lakes region, which is where we are, is not that different than the Alpine region, where we've got a lot of, or we have the ability to source, fresh fish, and we can forage in woodlands and get really beautiful produce and berries and nuts. And obviously we know we have a huge morel industry here, so mushrooms and things like that. And that's what you see a lot in Alpine cuisine. So it sounds a little intimidating at first, also lots of cheese. And I think people are like,
fondue. They do fondue there. Yep.
Yeah. But then when you sit down and it's presented in this beautiful space and prepared in this beautiful way, you realize, hey, it's not that foreign.
That was WDET's Ann DeLisi talking with Free Press restaurant and dining critic Lindsay Green.
Coming up on the Metro, we'll talk about what one woman is doing to recruit more Black people into the veterinarian field. That's coming up on the Metro.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET, where I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. And we're talking animals, but more importantly, we're talking about the representations of those who are taking care of your animals. In 1949, Alfreda Johnson Webb became the first Black woman to become a veterinarian. According to the Michigan Humane Society, Dr. Johnson Webb decided to continue her education, earning her master's degree in anatomy from Michigan State University in 1950. Go Green. But since that time, the number of Black Americans working as veterinarians hasn't changed that much. According to 2022 data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only about 2% of all vets right now are Black. Native Detroiter and Dr. Marcy McKeithen is one of those vets right now. Dr. McKeithen received her degrees at Florida A&M University and the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Florida. The Cass Tech grad, like many others in her field, are working to increase the number of Black students within the field. Joining the Metro right now to discuss this is Dr. Marcy McKeithen. Dr. McKeithen, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're a Cass Tech grad, you're a Detroiter. I always ask, what side?
The best side, west side. The only side.
I keep saying I got to get more East Siders on the show. So the West Sider is here with us today. And when you hear about the history of Black vets, of course, you hear about the first woman to do it, 1949. What do you see, or where do you see the importance there in picking up that torch?
Yeah, there's so many people, and young people specifically, that say they want to see a vet that looks like them. And it's statistically very difficult, especially depending on what part of the country you're in. So it's so important for me to be kind of that person for our Black and brown youth. And even I have so many clients come in, full grown adults I had a lady yesterday ask me, I've never had a Black vet before. Or do you know any other ones? And I'm like, why? Yes, I do. So I feel very privy to know a lot of our African American vets, and that's sometimes difficult because I know so many, but hearing that statistic of 2% is still always, kind of a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of, it was very stark to me to see it as well, because it is something that you don't necessarily think about when you're thinking just about, the medical field in general, but you don't think to go through the subcategories and actually break down those statistics. And you go through those subcategories and you see something like 2%. So, what role has history played in the lack of Black veterinarians in the country?
Yeah, well, Dr. Webb walked so I could run. I realize I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I also have lots of colleagues, beautiful Black women veterinarians, women veterinary hospital owners that I also walk in their footsteps. So I'm so grateful to all of those who come before me. The veterinary field is very small in general. In general, there's not a lot of veterinarians. And we're losing more and more as we go on, but it's a very small field, and is not a very diverse field. So it's sometimes difficult for, especially some of us coming from HBCUs and majorly African-American populated cities like Detroit, it's kind of hard to get in that field because we just don't have very clear paths. So that's why it's so important for me to come back home and kind of show that it can come full circle.
That was going to be one of my big questions was, that stark reality, that stark change when you go to a predominantly Black institution, and then you go, or even growing up in a predominantly Black city like Detroit, a majority Black city actually, and then you go to a PWI, predominantly white institution. What was that like, and that reality, seeing yourself in those seats? Yeah,
it was, I joked when I graduated, but I really didn't realize I was Black until I went to University of Florida. And that sounds crazy, but it's because I never had to be. I was always around all Black people, all Black professionals, my dentist, my doctors, everybody in leadership. So living in Detroit is such a beautiful thing because we are so Black, but we also get to see so many African Americans in very prominent positions. And I took that for granted. So going to University of Florida was definitely a wake-up call. I think we had 101 people in our class. There was 9 of us, and I was the only one out-of-state African American. So it was, I got hit with those statistics really early. And it was a tough transition going from an HBCU to going to a PWI down south. I'm coming from Detroit. So I admire all of you guys that did that at the age of 17. I was not mature enough to handle that even at 21. So it was definitely a culture shock all the way from school through every job that I've had. So it's been definitely a learning curve.
So now that I think about, you have Motor City Pet Care, that's the mobile unit that you had, correct?
Yes, that's the one that I had. Yeah.
Yes, and now you're out of the PetSmart in Troy. And what has that been like, especially when you're there and you see, honestly, little Black boys and Black girls, or just boys and girls of color coming in to see you, and they say, oh my gosh, look.
It's amazing. So my practice opened mid-December, and before I had a dog, a cat, a client, before I had my staff hired, I hosted a Jack and Jill event for my little Black babies. So my kids and all of their friends and their parents were the first ones in my clinic. So just to be able to have a space to allow children and their parents to come see the back of a veterinary clinic, and I show them my surgery suite, was so important to me. And I did that before I even saw my first client. So that's just kind of what I'm trying to do, is just be that space where you can come and just stop by and say, I want to see a Black vet. Well, here you go. Come on back.
Before I let you go, because we have to get out here pretty quick. We're running up on time. Yeah. But, what are some things, what are some things that you would like to let young people know, especially young Black and brown kids, about getting into the field and what that path would kind of look like?
It's lonely. So, and don't let that discourage you. It is hard to be a trailblazer. And I know Dr. Webb was a veterinarian back in the 50s, but as Black women and Black men in this field, we are still trailblazing, trying to make our imprint known. So it is a path that is not very well traveled, but do not be discouraged. You have a person you can come to in Troy to talk to about it. But yeah, just do not let that be discouraging, because it is a very lonely path, but it is a very, very possible path, and it is a great path.
Dr. Marcy McKeithen, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. Right now, you have your practice out of Troy PetSmart location.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Trailblazing the path of music all the time at noon. It is Ryan Patrick Hooper. What you got for us on In the Groove?
Man, the thing I'm really excited about is new Dab Ree, one of the most incredible producers and musicians to come out of this city, critical to the sound of what we call Detroit music. A new Back to Basics beat tape from Dab Ree. We're going to play a lot of that today on In the Groove, coming up on WDET.
That's the Metro for Friday, March 8th, 2024. You can listen to recent episodes online at wdet.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our technical director is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian. Our news director is Jerome Vaughn, and our program director is Adam Fox.
The Metro is a WDET production, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at wdet.org/donate.
You're listening to 101.9 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Tia, we were talking a lot about probate today. I never knew where that word came from. I thought it was like what an angler uses to catch
when you
fish.
said it, I said, go, Nick, go!
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.